So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alex Cowan. And Alex is the CEO or CTO and founder of Leonid Systems, and also the author of this amazing book, Starting a Tech Business. It's a great book. I have a copy. I read through it. I advise you all to take a look at this if you haven't and yet, because a lot of what he's going to teach tonight is in here for you to remember it by. And he is recently moved to Santa Cruz, so he's now a Santa Cruz local. He loves it here.
Yes, I do.
And really wants to help the community. He's a community guy. He wants to, come here and help everyone else to be successful here. Share the success he has had with his business. He basically built his business using the techniques he's going to teach tonight, and it's a very successful business. And he brought along with him Greg Cohen in the back there, and Greg is the principal of the 280 Group. It's a product management consultancy, and he also is an author of a book, and the book is Agile Excellence for Product Managers. So thank you both, Alex and Greg. They're going to guide you through tonight's workshop. Let's hear it for them.
Thanks for having me. So our goal here tonight is to put you all in a position to be more prepared for the Tech Rising event and propelling your idea forward in general. So we're going to go through some ideas, some introduction, and then we're going to spend the last 2 hours working off of a specific template that Greg and I have developed for putting your ideas into motion through design thinking and applying today's most modern techniques to forming ideas and getting them moving. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm the CTO of Leonid Systems. We build enterprise software for communications companies like Verizon and France Telecom, people like that. And I'm also the author of Starting a Tech Business, which is a book about putting your ideas into practice and making them into businesses. My main area of interest, and Greg's as well, is that there's so many great ideas about how to do new products, how to create new companies, and there's a lot of people practicing those, but there's an amazing amount of people that aren't. There's a big gap between all these new ideas and their actual practice out in the marketplace. And so our main area of interest isn't introducing big new fundamental ideas that are coming out of nowhere. Our main area of interest is in helping people with the practical application of those ideas. So I've assumed a few things about you all. So let's go through those, make sure you don't get bored. I've assumed you have the desire to learn about launching new ideas, whether that's in your existing company or towards the formation of a new company. I'm not assuming that you have any particular technical knowledge about software development or programming, and I'm assuming that you're ready to take action on these ideas, that we're going to sit here and the output of all this is going to be you all having some specific things on paper or virtual paper that you can walk out with and put your ideas into motion. So we're gonna run through these ideas, and then we're gonna kick off some work with these templates, and Greg and I will both be available to answer questions and work with you individually. So the four main concepts we're going to talk about are new ideas in these four areas. The first area, ideation, is the process of pulling your idea together conceptually. And we're going to talk about kind of the old way and the new way on all these things. And the old way was a lot of what I would call self-love. Your idea was your baby, you stuck with it to the end, bitter or sweet or whatever. There's a lot of this in the 1990s during the dot-com period in the early 2000s. And a lot of bad ideas implemented, or a lot of ideas that could have been okay if they were just a little more meticulous. And now we have this idea of design thinking, which involves going out and looking at your buyer, looking at your user with more empathy and applying directed creativity to the empathy you acquire through that. So in some ways, the self-love, the old way, is kind of a classical idea. Henry Ford said, if I asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me, do you know?
A carriage with better horses.
A faster horse. Yes, yeah. And that is, so there's some validity to that. And when you're really breaking new ground, sometimes you do have to have some faith and you do have to take the leap a little bit. But once you have a product in the market, there's absolutely no reason not to apply this idea of design thinking. Look at how Ford's doing now. You know, okay, but not great. The two pillars of design thinking are empathy and creativity. And this one's seamstress. She's sewing, but seamstresses require a lot of cutting, a very careful cutting over long periods of time. So somebody who knew a lot about what seamstresses do went out and formulated the idea for sewing scissors. Have you ever held sewing scissors versus regular scissors? They're terrific. They're very appropriate. They fit right in your hand. You can sit there and cut very closely and carefully for long, long periods of time. So the nice thing about this idea of design thinking, particularly for high-tech product development, is there are some ready-made concepts and toolkits that you can use to apply this. The first one is personas. A persona is a vivid description of your user. You might have one, or you might have several. This is an example of a bad persona. I have a few startup teams that I mentor, and one thing we spend a lot of time on is developing the personas. And most personas, a lot of personas that I see out of the gate kind of look like this. Some bullet points, a vague idea, a bunch of stuff that looks like it either came off the internet or it came off of some questionnaire where they asked, hey, you know, would you like a product that does X? And that's not what a persona is about. You're there to observe, and it's your job to interpolate what these people tell you into a notion of whether or not they're going to find what you're doing interesting or useful, and how you're going to figure that out. It's a great story. It might not be true, but I've experienced this in very similar situations about Sony. I've never been able to actually validate that it's really true. But it's widely circulated urban legend, and if you're getting into high tech, you should know it. You know, so the story is this: Sony, you might remember, they came out with a yellow Walkman, and so they had a focus group. They pulled people in from off the street, and they said, "Hey, you know, what do you think about this yellow Walkman?" Everybody said, "This yellow Walkman is terrific. I love it. It makes me feel sporty. It's so nice. It's so much better than your black Walkman. That was so boring. Yellow Walkmans will be much, much better for you, Sony. Go out and do it." And then somebody had the foresight to put a pile of Walkmans by the door. People who participated could take one. Everybody took the black Walkman. It's because, you know, you can't really ask people, hey, would you like this hypothetical thing that I'm thinking of doing? People don't think about their needs in that way. So the main cause is be very careful with questionnaires and focus groups and direct lines of questioning, particularly about topics that are very abstract. You know, you ask people, hey, how many times did you eat potatoes last month? How do you feel when you drive? Those are fine. You know, people can respond directly about something that they're feeling or doing or not doing or doing with a certain frequency. Those are fine. But overall, your job with a persona is to go out, take photos, take videos, everything you possibly can, get quotes. Because remember, you're packaging this stuff up for collaborators, even if you don't have them at the moment. This is a somewhat better persona. You can see the photos kind of lo-fi. It's taken with an iPhone, and this narrative it's like a story. It's like we're gonna write a little short story about this person, or put her in a play, or something like that. It's not bullet points, males, 1835, play video games, own an Xbox. That's not a good persona. Good persona is something you develop after sitting, talking with these people, observing them in their natural environment. It's like Animal Planet, but for actual people. That's how you develop personas. Once you have personas, you develop stories about these personas, and story-driven design is very popular. Some of you probably heard about it. These stories actually have a very specific format that's quite helpful. As a persona, whoever our persona is, I want to do something so that I can derive a benefit. And it's interesting, one thing when I'm working with my own staff at Leonid and the startup teams I mentor, I notice a lot is people tend to leave out this last part, you know, the third part. They think it's superfluous, they forget it, it's sort of a little bit less natural maybe than the first two clauses in that sentence, but it's the most important, particularly where you're in the early phases of developing an idea, because it establishes why you think that this person wants to do this thing, which is extremely important. And that validation of whether that's really correct or not is one of the most important things you'll be doing in the early phase of your idea development. So the main thing about design thinking is don't produce crap. This is a photo of some art by the mysterious and wonderful street artist Banksy. is his name. He's from the UK. The main thing is, you don't have to be the person that can actually mill and create a pair of sewing scissors. Some people are, some people aren't. But everybody can be the person that goes in and says, seamsters they need better scissors. Their hands hurt, they can't cut carefully enough. Everybody here is capable of doing that. And that's really what this is about. And I can tell you this will be enormously helpful to you in every area of endeavor, particularly professional ones. So the next idea we have is in the area of planning. So the interesting thing about startups, and I was at a lot of these companies, sometimes I was in management, sometimes I wasn't, but everybody had to have a 5-year plan. And it was just sort of this obligatory thing that startups felt they had to do, and VCs felt they had to see, but VCs called it the big lie. Everybody knew it was this sort of act of fiction. Now we have this idea of iterative management popularized by a book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And the basic idea is a 5-year plan is wildly inappropriate for a startup. Even if you succeed, you will not have any idea how the business is going to bear out over 5 years. But at the flip side, so some people did it, and then mostly what they did was they just made a 5-year plan, they put it in the drawer, and once in a while they would dust it off to show to their board or because they had lost their way. And then they really wouldn't have a plan in the meantime, which is equally unmanageable. Having no plan at all is just as bad as having a ridiculous plan that you can't possibly bear out. The great thing is that there was a wonderful standby, very appropriate to high-tech the whole time, just regular science. So in science, in the scientific method, you have an idea. This is your inspiration. You develop a hypothesis, which is a fancy word, which just basically means a set of assumptions that are provable or disprovable through some sort of experiment. So you go through and you figure out what those experiments are, and when you're working on a startup, whether it's a new product in an existing company or a new product's going to drive the formation of a new company, you want to pick the fastest, cheapest, easiest experiments that you possibly can, and we're going to do that tonight. You go through your experiment, you get your results, and if you set things up right, and you may not, you may have to loop back again and try it again, you should be able to say, did I prove this or did I disprove it? I did prove it, I go back, I loop through again. And if I did prove it, great, it's proven out. Now that I know the idea is valid, I'm confident to spend more money, hire more people, get more people involved, move to the next step. And this is a tried and true formula that's brought us science itself. It works really well. The simple artifact of actually doing this stuff is a small table where you prioritize each of your assumptions. You decide whether it needs proving or not. And remember, just because an assumption is important doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be proven. And then you have your experimental design. This is, of course, just a note. The experiment may be more elaborate than this. So an example of an assumption that really needs to be proven is that parents want a better organized distribution of their kids' allowances. That probably needs to be proven. So you can post the proposition in online ads and see if people click through and look at the material. You can measure signups on a landing page. These are some very popular, lightweight ways to do this stuff. We're going to talk more about how to structure experiments later on. Parents have smartphones. This is an important assumption, maybe for this particular idea, let's say, but that does not need to be proven. So it's important to have it there for the chain of reasoning, but you don't have to go and prove it.
Could you just talk about why you don't have to prove that one?
Because any assumption that doesn't need to be proven is, there's reports out there where you can refer to and say, look, it's publicly understood and accepted by a reputable authority that 70% of parents or adults over 35 have smartphones. Sometimes a matter of opinion, but ideally, it's something where you can find facts from reputable sources. That's probably the easiest litmus test for deciding whether you need to prove it. Yes?
Would that also just be important for you because that's just who your demographic is? So you're interested in those people that do have smartphones because you're selling it?
Yeah, I'm sort of presupposing that's important here. But we're going to go through a specific example in the next segment where we look at a company and how they lay out a few of their key assumptions. Other questions? So the other tool we have on planning then now is this idea of a business model canvas. This was popularized by a guy named Alex Osterwalder, who also writes for Wiley. And this is a European technique that became very popular in the consulting business, and these guys popularized into this idea of a business model canvas. And the nice thing about the business model canvas is that if a 5-year plan is too heavyweight, is not the right thing for startup, again, we don't want to have no plan at all. We want to have, having a plan is extremely important. So what this allows you to do, we're going to go through an example in the next segment, is lay out the key components of the business. Make sure you've thought through them all. Make sure you have a clear, shared, mutual understanding with your collaborators about what those are. And the last thing you need to have is a financial model. And there's a template we're posting on alexandercowan.com. The main thing I notice with financial models and startups is that the middle ground is a bad place. People spend a lot of time and energy trying to predict out the details of their finances in 2.5 years. What you want in a financial model is on the very short term, you want to be very detail-oriented about expenses. So you don't have to wake up every day and worry about money. You have a plan, you know what you're going to spend. And then on the longer term, you want to have a model that allows you to easily forecast out your unit economies as you start to understand your business model better. What you don't want to do is, if I ask one of you, what do you think the temperature is going to be tomorrow in Santa Cruz, you could probably tell me, to a reasonable degree. But if I asked you, well, can you tell me out to 3 significant digits? I mean, no matter how many things you write down or what you do, you're just not going to make that number any more accurate. So the important thing with financial models, focus on the short term, have a way you can extrapolate for the long term so you can look at what the business looks like at scale. But don't spend too much time in the middle. So these are the 3 main tools, and we're going to go through examples of all of these later. The set of assumptions, the business model canvas, and you want a solid financial model. So let's go through this idea of applying the scientific method for a startup. So you have your idea, and you want to ask yourself, and ideally you've gone out and looked at your personas and your stories, and you want to ask yourself, do I have real evidence from my buyer that this idea is compelling? Then what you want to do is lay out your assumptions. What are the key assumptions that are required to make this thing successful, and what's the quickest, easiest way you can knock those off? Then you want to design experiments where you're going to go out and you make sure that the data you get back is going to allow you to prove or disprove this. And the nice thing about this model for doing a startup is that a startup is a very difficult thing to manage because you have this pairing of uncertainty and urgency that can make the enterprise very unmanageable and stressful. So another nice feature of this whole method is that it makes the things that the startup absolutely has to do very visible to everybody and easy to understand. So at the end of this, you should be able to say, hey, did we prove this? Or did we disprove it? If we proved it, let's scale up and go to the next step. Let's go get some money. Let's go spend more of our time on this. Let's quit our jobs if that's what you're going to do. Or you say, we're going to revise. So the third area we've got is organization. And there used to be this tendency that I call aping, where the idea was, well, we'll make this little company a big company by having it act like a big company. It seems ridiculous, but this went on quite a lot. Some of you may have even been in places that did this. And that, of course, isn't true. A startup, a company, meaning specifically a company that hasn't yet identified its product market fit. What is it going to sell to who, and are they definitely going to buy it? They need to be set up in fundamentally a different way than a mature company. It's also not true that means that big companies that are process-driven and organization-driven are bad. They're not. Many startups falter because they fail to adopt that more structured, process-driven approach to managing the business. But in the early stages, a little startup is not the same thing as a big organization. It needs to be organized to do the things we've already talked about in fundamentally a very different way. And Steve Blank, in his book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, introduced this idea of customer development. And the idea is basically this, that before you found a product market fit, you need to organize into small, heterogeneous, single-purpose teams whose job is to ascertain whether there's a product market fit out there or not. And we, for instance, at Leonid, we do both of these things. We have our existing products where we have a relatively traditional process-driven infrastructure. Development builds stuff, sales sells it, design designs it, operations installs and supports it, and then we have customer development teams which have a much less formal process. They very standalone, and their job is to go out on the products where we haven't yet identified the fine points and we don't exactly have it nailed down who exactly is going to buy this thing and why, and to ascertain that and build prototypes. And they operate in very different ways, and it's important that they both have the flexibility to do that. let's look at how all this stuff comes together from kind of the old way that startups used to do things to the new way now, from a founding event out to the first board meeting. So in the old way, these founders get a great idea and they create a 5-year plan to show to VCs, showing that it's a surety that these VCs are going to get 10x returns from this business. The VCs go through and let's say this company raises the money, they're in a hot space. The VCs are in kind of a scale business themselves and they want to put a lot of capital to work. So they encourage the startup to go out and hire their buddies and lawyers and accountants and spend a lot of money. And that a lot of times doesn't work out because big company experience is not bad, but it's not the same thing as small company experience. Somebody who's worked at a mature business for the last 8 years with infrastructure and processes and a known product and a known market that they have to execute against at scale has a very different perspective and skill set probably than somebody who needs to get down in the weeds and learn about a brand new market and a brand new product market fit. So
what does VC mean? Venture
capitalists. So these are people that invest private capital into high risk ventures, which is pretty much any small venture. So these new hires come in with their established track records. That's probably not a good fit. These new hires from these big companies are putting their established recipes to work, but these are established at companies that are operating against a known product market fit, selling a known proposition, and everybody's trying to conform to this ridiculous 5-year plan. They have better odds of winning the lottery. It's almost impossible. And they get ready to face the music with the board, which I've done this. Or I've been the grunt that has to go try and create some story around this, and all sorts of strange theories are concocted. The board's like, this doesn't look right. This is you can kind of see where this heads. With the new way of doing things, try to ignore that. I think this is an old version. Sorry. The founders get a great new idea and they lay out all their key assumptions. And their first thing that they're doing, and this could be one person, it could be a pair of people, but you don't necessarily need a lot of people. They're doing hands-on validation of their key assumptions. This lowers the capital requirements. They may or may not need to go to a VC, a traditional investor, and raise capital at all. They may be able to do this in stepwise fashion where they don't even need to do that. We didn't do it at Leonid, for example. And
so you're talking about
bootstrapping,
or friends and family, or something.
Or friends and family. Mm-hmm. Yep. Or depending on your business, if you go into a bank, I mean, you can take out a loan if it's you're probably gonna have to collateralize it with your personal assets. But if you're starting a small scale, if you're trying to raise $1 million, that's for most people that's not very workable. They might as well go out and raise private capital. If you're doing it for a manageable amount of money for you, that may be okay. You may be okay doing that. So the nice thing about having laid out their key assumptions is that this gives them very clear immediate priorities in hiring. It also helps them not do things. A lot of startups I've worked with are like, all right, well, we have this idea. We need to go find a developer right away and get them in and get them. That's not always the right thing to do because you're paying that person or you're paying that person in goodwill if they're part of the founding team. And if you don't actually know what they should build yet, you're going to waste their time. And I've done this, been this person. And it's much better to have them in when you really know what they want to build, unless they're going to participate in that process. But if your idea is let's get somebody in here to start building something, that's how we get there. That's not necessarily quite the right thing. You want to step through your assumptions and figure out where you're at on your certainties. Yes?
Well, without having the old way and the new way side by side, which would be handy, what you just described, it's hard to imagine that a bunch of founders in the old way, I know people do all sorts of things, but do they really not think about their assumptions?
They really didn't know. Mm-mm.
So
Pets.com. I mean, Pets.com, Webvan, Teledesic, Telecom, which is the industry we work in, is most famous for wasting huge amounts of money on projects that did not have a proven market.
Which is bad for management, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that's just the way things were. And honestly, I think part of it comes from, not to digress too much, but part of it comes from the, history. I mean, it used to be businesses, you had to set up a physical shop, or you're going to dig a mine, or build a factory, or, a lot of this stuff is cultural. It just comes from the fact that these businesses had to have a physical antecedent. Yes, Greg.
Yeah, I just also comment that part of that too was the capital requirement to start a business. And like just even the original .com, you were buying an Oracle license for 5 to 6 figures. And it did take a team of 20 or 30 people to develop a significant application. Now there's open source software.
And they had to do a lot
that's
of
free.
justifying, yeah.
Right, exactly. So now you can start a company with a few people and still build a meaningful application, certainly in the software world, and get it out there and have people find it with Google. Much cheaper ways to build awareness.
Yeah, the software development itself has changed quite a lot, and that's what kind of interested, I think, both Greg and I to look at this area of actual practice, because there are so many opportunities out there. At the same time, there's a lot of clutter, for the same reason, and it's, it is important to be very focused. So, so founders lay out these assumptions. They go and they get these new hires. The nice thing is that everybody's got a clear role and success criteria because they're operating against this set of assumptions that they need to validate. And everybody's running full tilt at this moment where they say, okay, we've proven this, and we're going to persevere and scale this up, or we're going to pivot, change our experiment, and loop through this again to figure out where our product market fit is. If this works well, when you go to face a board, which may just be the founders themselves, you should have clear conclusions and data that points to whether the idea is something that should be scaled up or revised and retested. And this works actually pretty well, both for new products in existing companies as well as startup companies. So the last area we have is development. And the old way of doing this stuff was you had requirements and you had design, and there was these very long, elaborate processes, big, long documents about what the team was going to do, and that didn't work very well. Now, you've probably heard of Agile. Agile is the way that most startups and small companies develop product. It has a couple of nice features. One is that it takes personas and user stories as its primary input, and you work with your developers on those general inputs. You don't try to specify and design the software in advance, which is rarely a good idea. And then you have discussions, that development proceeds, and you work in these very small chunks, usually 2 to 6 week cycles. And that's nice because that gives you product very quickly that you can go out and show to people and get reactions from it and see if it's really working or not. So there's a lot of mythical properties of Agile. It's, faster and universally better. It isn't necessarily any of that, but what it helps you do is take smaller steps so you don't, run off in the wrong direction and achieve failure against your big elaborate plan. Greg is a world authority on Agile, having wrote the wonderful book Agile Excellence for Product Managers, which I personally enjoyed a lot. So another interesting thing about Agile is that you'll hear a lot, people tell you it works like this, it works like that. None of that's really true. The original Agile manifesto was only 68 words. You can go online and read it in about 30 seconds. And the basic idea is that they value individual interactions over processes and tools. They value working software over comprehensive documentation. They value customer collaboration over contracts and elaborate plans, and they value responding to change over following an arbitrary plan. This is essentially what that 68-word manifesto says. So the way that Agile works in practice is that if you're the product owner or the person who is looking out and figuring out what the product ought to be, in the present iteration is what these cycles are called, you'll be working with your team on, hey, should it look like this, should it look like that? Do we make this decision or that decision? Oops, sorry. On the past iteration, you'll be going out and validating the relevance of your features with customers. And just because you built it, doesn't mean it's the right thing. And that's the virtue of Agile, is it lets you find that out quickly. And then on future iterations, you'll be creating a backlog of user stories that you'd like to get implemented and prioritizing them. And that's how it works in summary. So the design thinking gives us direction, personas, and user stories. Iterative management gives us a very lightweight but highly structured way to organize the construction of our startup and the validation of our idea. Customer development gives us a very workable model for staffing a startup versus an established organization. And Agile gives us working product in very small segments so we can go out and see if we're barking up the right tree. So that's the first segment of our talk. Now we're going to go through this stuff in the context of an example company. But does anybody have any general questions? Nope. All right.
I have
Yes.
one.
Go ahead.
And it has to do with sharing the ownership of an idea with everyone and compensation.
Yep.
How do you decide to do that?
Just trying to think if there's a good general recipe. Well, in general, it's important to, I mean, if a bunch of people came up with an idea collaboratively and that's where you are, that's a very hard thing to value. Usually people just split it up. Beyond that, if you're a developer in, say, or a, an accountant, you're usually, a good idea is to ascribe a certain amount of, fair market value to what they're doing, and then they can, either get paid or they can get equity in the company on a per rata basis. That's the easiest answer. There are rarely any easy answers in this area because people feel like, well, it's mostly my idea, but partly your idea, or I introduced us to so and so, and that was the most important thing. It's never, there's no silver bullet. It's quite difficult usually.
I would think that could be a very divisive thing.
It can. It's best to just get it sorted out up front, though. That's one thing I always advise my teams on, because what you don't want to do is everybody's been working hard on this thing for a long time, and they run into this whole business of who gets what midway through.
Oftentimes what startups do is they value the idea differently than the work done towards the realization of that idea. And the actual idea valuation is a tiny fraction of it, because the idea in itself is worth very little, if anything, because if you had that idea, I guarantee that 1,000 other people around the world had almost the same idea. It all comes into how we bring that idea into existence, where the value is created against that idea. And the reason why people have the same ideas at the same time, I study evolutionary biology, is because there's a change in an ecosystem that's introduced that releases all kinds of possibilities. And people see those possibilities at the same time because of this new change. So that's my little spiel on that. So, I think that the people who come up and conceive the ideas get a real small percentage, and then you figure out who's doing what work and how much of the value of that work, and then you just divide that up.
We can
Although usually the person with the idea is the founder, so
they oftentimes retain the CEO position, which means they're going to end up with more equity.
Yeah, we can go, if you have a specific example, we can go through it in the workshop part.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Maybe it's not quick. So I can see how this works with an idea that improves upon or is similar to existing ideas. So, creating network externalities for existing products, or creating products that are a tweak of existing products. But how does this work with something that's entirely new and different? So people may not know that they have a need for this thing, or may not immediately perceive how they would use it.
I think, well, that's why I think, the idea of developing those personas is really important, because you can't go out and ask people about a new, hey, would you like this new idea? That's the Sony problem, right? Nobody really knew how they would react to a yellow Walkman. Turned out, not very well.
But the yellow Walkman is just a tweak on a black Walkman.
It's just a Walkman. But let's say you've got an idea for
a way to walk on water.
A way to walk on water.
So you're going to take a pill and you're going to walk on water. People right now can't do that. There are artificial means, but if you could walk on water, and everybody wants to be able to get across the river and make it super simple, but nobody's thinking that just a human being can do that. So this is going to require new thinking on people's part. And of course, everybody can use this idea. So, your potential market is sort of everybody. How does this work with something like that is an entirely new thing?
Well, even if the market is everybody, certain people will probably find this thing more interesting than others. And, you would want to focus, those would be your sort of primary personas that you would develop. And I think that, if it was, there is a thing where it's like a lot of these methods don't apply to farm. If you can find a cure for cancer, you don't need to validate whether people are going to want that.
Exactly.
They will. So, if your thing is literally a surefire thing, then a lot of this validating whether it's really going to work or not, you don't need to do. If you can get it done and get it to work, then you don't need to worry. But there's so few ideas like that now, especially outside of medical and energy and things like that. You know, so I would say what you're doing, if it's a very new idea and your market is potentially everybody, you're figuring out who cares the most about this, or who can I sell to initially to, you know, make money, because a lot of it's about, you know, getting critical mass.
Right.
And then you're learning about the area of endeavor. Where do you walk to? How do you get around? You know, would you like to walk on water? I mean, or even if it's just a different, let's say you're inventing a new walk, you know, that people can do that make them, their heels don't hurt. Then, you know, you just want to find out about, you know, walking. Do you care about walking? How much do you walk? Where do you walk to? How do you find out about new ways of, you know, exercise things or doing things like that?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but this process also helps you with not only creating your product, but finding those people who would use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some notes in the template about this, but I mean, yeah, it's the basis of everything. What should you put on your website? What do you know, what email list should you buy if you want to do spam? You know, it really informs pretty much everything that you would ultimately do. Greg.
Yeah, there's one point. So to your question here, these methods are more important for that situation than the traditional route of building a whole company, and it's about getting the product out in users' hands inexpensively and fast to see how they're going to use it, and doing that earlier rather than trying to build up a set of assumptions. And I mean, the one company that comes to mind for me is Twitter. Right, there was this general idea that being able to broadcast SMS messages of 140 characters would be useful. Right, I don't think those founders ever envisioned how it would actually get used. They only got key traction when they started using it at South by Southwest conference, where people saw it and started downloading and playing with it. And at the same time, I think 5 years in, they still hadn't figured out their business model yet, right? And how are we going to create revenue?
Right.
And there are times whatever product you have is going to fit into that category where people haven't used it and don't know what they would do and can't really tell you how they would use it.
Yeah, particularly the agile fast, the idea of building it in small pieces and seeing how it works out is very apropos to that. Any other questions? All right, so we're going to look at did you have a question?
Yeah, when you refer to agile, are you talking about a system of thinking or the actual product of the project management product, or?
I would, to date, I would say we're referencing just the general idea of Agile, the Agile Manifesto specifically, you know, the general principles. So there's a lot of different practices of Agile Extreme Programming, Scrum, and some of these are very predictive, and prescriptive rather, sorry, and they have, you know, there's big, huge books, you know, that spell out every facet of how you should do these things. That's not really what we're so much talking about is Agile in contrast to you know, elaborate planning and long-scale development cycles and things like that. Anything else? All right, so we're going to look at how these things shake out with an example company. So Jen and Jay, two friends that have worked together for several years, have an idea for an app that families will use to stay organized. And they think that this general area, you know, there's stuff out there, but nobody's really done a terrific job, and they think that the area is ripe for an endeavor. So in ideation, the first thing Jen does is she goes and she sees her family in Sacramento and her extended family's friends and so forth. And she goes out and she just talks to these people, watches what they do in their family life, sees if they use technology at all, what kind of things that they'd like to figure out how to do better, what things, you know, fluster them, cause problems, and things like that. And she starts building some personas and some user stories. So again, as a persona, I want to do something so that I can derive a benefit. That's the format for a story. Here are some example stories that she develops about this. As a parent, that's the persona. I want to post a roster of chores so that I can link it to handing out the kids' allowances. So that's a user story about one of these parents. And she's not sitting there asking him, hey, would you like an app that helps you organize your household and things, you know, that would be the yellow Walkman kind of question that probably won't get you very good results. So she takes this back, confers with her collaborator, Jay, and they find out that there's very little express interest in organizational tools per se. But that, you know, keeping the household organized is a big problem, in fact. And so they can't go out and be like, hey, this is a tool to organize your household. Doesn't look like that's going to resonate with these families. Maybe they build something, they show it to them, and they love it, but kind of feels like maybe that's just not the right positioning for this. they found out that the people that do use tools somewhat, they're relatively happy, and that these communities self-reference a lot. There's, nobody goes to college to become a parent, so these people are learning from each other. Certain of them post a lot on Facebook or on blogs, so that's good, because that tells them that, if they hit something, this is a community that can go out and, explain that something's working well to everybody else, and they'll hear about it. So that's good. And then they find out that, really the household in general wants to be offline more versus less. They actually don't want to be looking at the phone all the time when they're sitting around together. And they grapple with creating this time where they're going to do that, where they're just going to be together as a family and take it easy and slow down. And so they actually think that that's really what they want to focus on overall is this process of how do they create this quality time, this slow time. So they come up with an app called Pheasants, hypothetical, and it's going to have a website that they log into, a Facebook app, it'll send periodic emails, and there'll be a mobile app so families can use it on the go. They start drafting stories. One thing to realize about stories is that it sounds like kind of maybe a little bit of a fast and loose way to organize something like software development, but actually it's very flexible. There's this idea of epic stories, which describe a general endeavor, and then individual atomic user stories that describe particular actions, and then this idea of test cases against those stories. Make sure that in this case you can do X or do Y, that help you buttress the level of detail in those stories. And we're going to go through a few specific examples of this in the template that we've got. So here's an epic story. As a parent, I want to post a roster of chores so that I can link it to handing out the kids' allowances. The test case there might be, you make sure, an individual story within that might be, as a parent, I want to create a list of chores so that I can divvy them out to my kids. That's sort of the first step in doing this. A test case would be, make sure there's a preset list of chores to choose from. Maybe they have some typical sets of chores that, a city house, a country house has. Make sure that these are available, these chores, through autocomplete. So, if the person starts typing them in, they can get them auto-completed. Make sure the user can assign a value to the completion of the chores. The whole point, ultimately, of the thing is to divvy out allowances. Make sure it's possible to schedule the frequency of the chore in these different ways. These are examples of how you supplement the story with test cases. And this is a good way to be descriptive and practice design thinking. And equally importantly, if you guys are going to go meet with collaborators, developers, tech raising, these are very developer consumable artifacts. It's very easy for a programmer to take this as input and kind of understand what you're trying to get at. One of the hardest things about developing software, particularly these days, is making it clear your intent. What you've understood about this marketplace and you want to communicate to your developer. There's a great story from our study from the book Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, where at UC San Diego they did a study where somebody sat with a partner at a desk and they tapped out a song like Happy Birthday or something. And the interesting thing about the result was that 70% of the people that tapped out the song figured that the other person had understood the song. But in fact, less than 10% of the people actually understood the song. So it's just sort of an interesting result, from the standpoint of we always think that our ideas are really clear, but often they're not. And so this is a good way to make sure you're being clear and put those things down in an organized way. So let's talk about how Jen and Jay do their planning, put their organization together. So they start listing their key assumptions. Families have a substantial desire to organize quality time, this slow time. They need to prove that because the families may just want it, they don't really want to organize around it. They can run online ads with various descriptive terms and see if people click through on those and read what they've got. How would they come up with those descriptive terms and make sure that they're using the right type of language? Well, they would have gotten that from their field research where they went and developed those personas. That's why developing these personas and doing this field research is so important. You should take notes on exactly what these people say. You should record them. You should take photos of them. You want to make your portrait of these people as vivid as you possibly can. And that'll pay off to so many different things you're going to want to do downstream. Families are on Facebook. They do not need to prove this. There's publicly available pieces of data that will show that they are. People kind of intuitively know that they are. Family members regularly use mobile apps. Also important, but does not require proving. Families will find the Pheasant solution credible So one thing about this slow time thing is it's not a science. You know, these people have to believe that whoever's supplying this stuff knows about how to help families organize. And by listing this proposition out, they come to the conclusion that they have a real issue here. They're two, you know, high-tech alumni. They're parents, but they don't really necessarily have any fantastic ideas about how to do this. They can develop stuff, they can test it out, but are people going to find them credible? They need to prove that that's true, and they think that they're going to actually have a problem doing that. So they find the author Jack Chernow, who is a self-help guru. This is a synthetic person. There is no such guy. Are you looking for him?
No.
No. He's not a real person. But he's a hypothetical expert in how families create quality time. And they go through and they find that, you know, this is a way that they can fix this and figure out the assumption. They start to work with him. Oops, sorry. The other two assumptions that they want to prove out, and these are sort of second order priority, but they're still important, are that families will find purchase with readily identifiable influencers. They need to prove this, but they've got a pretty good hunch that this is true, that these people go out and blog and things, and they can, they have a couple ideas on how they can go out and prove that. And this related assumption is that pivotal users will propagate the Pheasant solution through viral user acquisition, which means that people are telling each other about it, and that's an important assumption that they also need to prove. One, I think, important point is that there's, I think, an underlying idea that if something's good, it'll go viral, and that's not necessarily untrue, but it's not necessarily the best way to look at those things. The traditional way of looking at user adoption, of people referencing each other and buying things, is this idea of the technology adoption life cycle. It was actually developed about farmers adopting corn and popularized for high tech by a guy named Jeff Moore in a book called Crossing the Chasm. And his basic thing was, in high tech, you probably can't see labels here, but you have some early adopters, people that have an acute need, they like to experiment, buy new things, but between those people and the early majority, the first part of the mainstream market, there's this big chasm. It's really hard to cross it. And that's because these early majority people, the mainstream market, are very pragmatic about why they buy things. They don't want to buy something if they perceive that it's unproven or risky. And I think that's certainly still true, but this was more true when you were buying a PC versus Macintosh, or making a big investment. What's my cost to adopt an app or something? It's probably zero, but it's my time. I mean, it's not absolutely nothing. So this chasm is a little bit smaller, but I think the real point is that there's more constructive, robust ways of looking at user adoption. I like the idea of pool, billiards. The first thing I learned about playing pool, I'm not very good, but I'm okay, and I've learned a lot, is that beyond just hitting the one ball, you're trying to leave the cue ball, the white ball, in a position where you can hit the next ball. I think that's a really easy way to think about user adoption. You asked about the walking on water thing. I mean, one thing, particularly if your product has a cultural component, is you want to make sure that the first group that you get is going to be a group that the second group looks to, or at least is neutral, for adopting things. So, for example, if you have something that you want to sell to soccer moms and suburban teenagers who listen to Snoop Dogg, well, these people spend a lot of time together in minivans, but they don't really want to buy the same things. Especially the kids don't want to buy the same thing as the mom. So you need to make sure that these groups reference each other in a positive way. Toys is something where they usually build things for older kids, because older kids don't want to buy something that the younger kids buy. Now we're going to look at the business model canvas for Pheasant. So if you remember, this is a lightweight planning tool, an alternative to the 5-year plan. So on customer segments, they have families with kids. That's really their main thing. On their value proposition, their main value proposition is a quality of life improvement. And convenience and usability is important, but really that's not the main thing. They've very explicitly chosen to focus on quality of life. On channels, they're going to use Jack Chernow's site. They're going to use Facebook, iTunes, the Android store. All are places for them to get product out and get the word out. Customer relationships. These mavens, these focal parents that are going to go blog or talk about it, they're going to give them dedicated personal assistance on how to use this thing, because they want to learn how these people use it. They want to make sure they're initially successful. They want to get that early feedback as soon as possible. And then for the general market, this is, of course, a self-service app. You know, they're supposed to be able to just sign up and start using it. On revenue streams, they're going to do advertising. They'll have sponsorships, which are sort of more holistic advertising and attachment campaigns to the media. And then they'll have a premium subscription model. On key resources, they've got Jack Chernow as their editorial resource, very important, and it's important to identify that. The user experience, mobile device development, web application development are all things that they need to be able to do at the right time, once they're sure that's what they want to build. Key activities are problem solving around this idea of quality time and other various family activities. They've got Jack as a key partner. And on their cost structure, they have a lot of fixed costs to build this infrastructure, and they have royalties that they pay to Jack, but that primarily it's really a fixed cost, which is very common for a technology company. This is a cursory version of their financial plan. They're putting in about $290K before they reach their first pivot. That's the amount of money that they want to dedicate to this thing. That's not how much it necessarily costs to do a startup. It's sort of an arbitrary number. You can see their contractor expense ramping up, but not until their third month here, right? And that's an important thing. Don't start paying implementation resources before you're really ready to make sure you have them doing the right thing. I see that happen a lot. And so when they go through this iterative planning process, they have first they have this idea that his slow time is the right thing, that there's an interest in this, there is something that they're going to prove out, that Pivotal users will spread the word of something they're going to prove out. Posting of these propositions and this informational content followed by beta and target release where they're showing users a small version of the product. Those are their experiments, their experimental design. They're going to look at the response levels to those different propositions, whether or not users went out and shared this stuff, and that's how they're going to decide whether they're onto something good or whether they need to revise. Organization. Well, so this is kind of a small scale endeavor. On all this feasibility validation and getting their idea, really Jen and Jay were able, in our example, and should be able to figure this out for themselves. On customer development, they have Mikhail as their developer, we're going to say, for the mobile part. Jay is doing a little bit of the development himself. And then they've got contractors, Jack, Ruben, and Rita, that are going to help them out on setting up the systems, doing web apps. And scaling, they don't need to design the organization out beyond this. They're going to learn what they need to be doing, and that's on the basis on which they're going to formulate their larger organization. This is an org chart. And it may seem like, well, why would a startup have an org chart? It's still important to delineate what are all the different roles and things we need to do and who's going to do that. One is make sure that balls don't get dropped or people are overlapping. Believe me, everybody has plenty to do all the time. And two, it puts you in a position to have a more scalable organization. What it does mean in the context of a startup is you can see while Jen's the CEO, she's reporting, for instance, to Jay in her capacity as documentation manager here, for example. And that's fine. You're not breaking any law of physics or anything by doing that. It's fine, particularly in a startup. So I highly recommend making everybody's job roles explicit, even if you're in this relatively fluid phase where everybody's doing a lot of different things. So Jen and Jay are in a pretty good position. They have these technical backgrounds. They're used to developing products, but it is important, I think, to develop some certain foundation concepts to help you move forward. The most important things, I think, to start with are these foundation ideas of design thinking, iterative management, customer development, and Agile. It doesn't mean you have to understand these in a huge amount of detail, but it is good to have at least a basic idea of what these things mean. Oops, sorry. Then you want to have basic technical literacy. So it's really helpful to just understand, for instance, the model view controller framework, which is a way of looking at the way software applications are built. It's good to understand the basics of software architecture fundamentals, like what's the difference between an API versus the software integration versus the way an application sits on the iPhone. And it's good to understand the basic roles and systems in a technical team. What's the difference between a sysadmin and a developer? Should they be the same people in your case or different people? Agile is a great thing to learn about. Again, you don't have to learn about all the details. You don't have to read a giant book about it. It is good to understand the basic techniques. I will say Greg's book is a great way to get a very lightweight introduction to those things. And process design is good when you're trying to scale. And then, beyond this stuff, if you feel like you want to learn how to code, that's terrific. But I want people to come to me out of college. They majored in business or anything, and they say, "Hey, I want to work in high tech. Should I learn how to code?" And this is really my answer. Is maybe, but probably you should understand these foundation ideas first, because that'll help you understand what and how you want to learn how to code, if in fact you do, or maybe you want to learn about something else entirely, like search engine optimization or analytics. Starting a tech business is also a great way to get introduced to these things. There's also a lot of great stuff online, but this is a view on professional development. Development itself. So Jen and Jay are using Agile. So that means they're going to use 4-week cycles. Every iteration, they have a different set of things in each area that they're working on, and these things have interdependencies. That's just part of how they manage the program. This is what they're doing in their first iteration. And subsequently, they may have a notional idea about where they hope to get across those different iterations, but it's not a feature of Agile that you're predicting those things in a lot of detail. So that's it. Now we're going to start looking at the actual template you guys will use during the workshop. How many people have do most people have a computer? So can you go to ref? I'm going to put this up in a second. But and is everybody online? They know that the network to use is CruisioWorks, I think, and that the password's up there. Yeah. And if you don't have a computer with you, which is okay, Sarah has printed versions of the template. Can you maybe just raise your hand if you'd like one of those? And is everybody able to get online and so forth?
Is this stuff actually in that book too?
Yeah, the ideas are, the template itself is just online, yeah. Is anybody having any trouble getting online that wants to? No? Okay.
Are you open to questions now, or you're trying to move?
We're going to try and finish this part, then we'll do some questions, then we'll do the workshop where we'll talk to everybody individually.
That's where you want us to go?
Yep.
Go back.
Sorry.
Ref something.
Ref.alexandercount.com. I'll put it up here again. Just a second. A-N at the end. Cohen. C-O-W-A-N. I should get that. You don't. And if you do /pdesigner.
You may go there now.
You just type in ref.alexandercount.com. And then at the very end, type in design. There you go.
All right.
All right. So here we're going to go over this template and how it works a little bit. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go out and you're going to be doing your learning. This is direct observation of people, online research, prototyping, if you're set up to do that, and direct contact with these people. There is a section of the template at the very end. Oops, it's a little funny. Oh, there we go. It's quite strange. Okay. All right. So if you go to the table of contents here, there's a short template at the end here called field notes. There's a few bullet points there. The main thing though in field notes is there's no fixed recipe. The most important thing is just to be very vivid. Take photos, get quotes, record people. Every smartphone is a reasonable video recorder these days. So just, be very vivid. Collect absolutely everything and make sure you do write it down, because at least I find sometimes I think, oh, this was so interesting, I'll certainly remember it, and I don't, I forget. So be vivid, be thorough. That's the main thing about the discovery part. Then this template is actually filled out for a fictitious company called Enable Quiz, and they're building a lightweight quizzing application for companies to use in evaluating technical hires and doing skills audits with their existing staff. And so if you want to know about it, what Enable Quiz is about, you forget, there's this background section here that tells you about that. The main section is section 2. So here we go through, and this will tell you some ways, to go out and do this discovery. So this first section here where you say, who do we talk to? You can see there's a list of example interview questions. These are specific for Enable Quiz, but these objectives are things that you should definitely think through as you're formulating what you're going to go out and talk to people about. Again, you're not trying to collect statistically significant data. It's not important that you ask every single person the exact same thing. Try to keep things as natural as possible, but you do want to cover your bases, and you do want to have a little bit of a comparative basis. So understanding the buyer, like you understand your best friend, that whole idea of the persona being vivid and specific and personal. Understanding the buyer's operating environment, so this is where they walk. If you're talking about walking on water for Enable Quiz, this is how they hire technical talent and manage it. Understand the buyer's learning environment, so that means how would they find out about your product? That's definitely something you want to learn about, because your first problem you have by definition is customer acquisition. You want to understand the perception of the problem or need you're addressing. Do they think it's important, or is it just you that think it's important? How do they talk about it? What words do they use when they're describing it? You want to understand how the buyer is solving this problem today, or would like to solve the problem. And then you want to, it's always good to have kind of a casting a line question. Hey, anything else you want to tell me about? And then don't forget, this is a common thing that happens, if you want to come back in a few weeks or months or whatever and show them a prototype, don't forget to ask them, hey, is it okay if I come back? And again, don't forget to make a note about that, because you may think you'll remember, but you don't. I've at least had that experience. So the next thing is that there is a little bit of statistical work you can do online to kind of ascertain the way that people are describing what you're interested in. And this is easy to do, it's quick, it's a great tool, but it's not a substitute for going out and talking to a customer. But there's a great tool called, who's used Google Trends before? Yeah. Okay. So Google Trends is a very powerful tool. It'll tell you. So let's say Enable Quiz goes out and they've searched. It says that they searched for technical quiz, and they saw some clues in here that told them, well, there isn't a lot of search volume for that. That tells them, well, I can't go in and say, hey, I've got a technical quiz. People it's not an idea that people have right now, right at the moment. It's kind of like your thing of, what if, do people think in these terms or not? What if they don't? Then they go out and they look at, the different technical topics that they're going to propose to give people quizzes to go out and measure. So if they look for something like Windows Administrator, what you can see here is, this is, okay, so first of all, this scale from 1 to 100 is a relative scale. So 100 on the scale, which is right here, means that that was the high watermark of these searches. They do not tell you how many actual searches that is. But so what you can see is, and this is why they call it Google Trends, you can see is a sort of trending downward and kind of stabilizing. Probably because, who knows, people are searching for more specific things. There's a lot of other data you can see here as well. The most interesting thing is related terms. This is a actually kind of mysterious thing that Google does to help you look at, what are other things that this person was actually looking for when they look for this stuff. This is real helpful if you're looking at, what terms people use to describe what I'm talking about here. Just for contrast, if you look at a more modern technology like Node, sorry, then you can see here the difference, right? There's nothing, you know, and then in 2010 or late 2009, this starts to trend, and you know, and it's steadily moving upwards. That means it's moving upwards both at a relative and an absolute basis in terms of search volume. So that's Google Trends, great thing, fascinating, but you know, it's pretty one-dimensional. So it's certainly no substitute for going out and you know sitting with these prospective customers and learning about them. So next thing you have is design. This is the bucket I'm putting all the distillation of this field research in, any reaction you get from people based on prototypes, your personas, your problem scenarios, your stories, and our examples of these in the template in the next section here. So they go through and you can see these are example personas that they wrote up. These aren't, you know, the greatest personas ever written, but they're okay. They give you a basic idea about, you know, what kind of things you want to look at. There are photos. And then we come to the problem scenarios. So problem scenarios is a good thing to do before you start writing the user stories, because what can frequently happen is that you're writing user stories that are kind of self-fulfilling. You're already sort of specifying the product, but the most important thing in the early phase with your user stories is to make sure that they're motivated by an actual problem or need of some sort. So that's what the problem scenarios do, and you can see some notes that they made here. There's more extensive stuff in the book, but you can see the high-level summary conclusions they came to about these different personas they interviewed. So they interviewed the HR manager, people that do hiring, people are responsible for screening resumes of engineers. They interviewed functional managers, meaning people that are actually the end managers, people hiring these folks. And they looked at some job candidates, people coming in for interviews, some existing technical staff that get these things and these technical quizzes in the course of a skills audit, and just some sort of general stuff. And they made kind of a diagram here of what they think is wrong about the process, how they can fix it. You know, you can sketch this out. It doesn't have to be made up like this. And then there's some example user stories here with test cases. This is an epic story. These are constituent user stories and test cases. So you can see examples of those. And then there's a positioning statement here, which we're not going to talk too much about tonight, but this is a great way to make sure that, you know, once you've done all this stuff and you think you have your ideal nailed down, you should, you know, it may take you some time to perfect it, but you should be able to fairly readily formulate a positioning statement for what you're going to do. And it's a good thing to do to make sure that you've got a nice tight concept that's going to rise above the clutter and the noise floor. And then the last thing that we've got in the template here is a simple table that allows you to organize your assumptions. It really looks a lot like the thing that we looked at on the slides. It's in a Google Doc in Excel, and you can link to it from the bottom here. So that is really the main thing. What we're going to do now is Greg and I are going to be able to help you guys out. We have a format we're going to do. We're running a little bit late, but we're going to do 30 minutes on personas, 30 minutes on problem scenarios and user stories, 30 minutes on assumptions, and 30 minutes on next steps. And we'll call time for you guys. You will not, I would expect no one to finish these things in 30 minutes, but you should try to move on unless you really don't want to. Of course, you can do whatever you want. But we recommend trying to move through each of these things, spend a little bit of time on each one, and you know, we can help you through them. That's the idea, is to do a little bit and kind of crack the surface on all of these so you're more comfortable endeavoring to finish this stuff up. On the doc itself, if you have Google Apps, you can save this into your own domain here with the file menu. If you don't, you can just go to download. This one's the Excel one. I'm going to go back to the Word document. So you can go here to you can go to File, Save As, or Download As rather, Microsoft Word, and just save it locally on your computer, and then you can edit it. So, any general questions before we go into the workshops? No, good. Okay. So, Greg and I, raise your hand if you want to talk to one of us now.
About what?
About your idea and filling out this template. Who has ideas that they want to work on? Everybody? Do you?
Yes.
What about the water thing? Okay. Does anybody not have ideas and they're interested in pairing up with somebody or working with us on a synthetic idea? You do? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have an idea, but I don't think I want to work on it.
Same thing.
Okay, then you're in the same boat. Okay.
Yeah.
Is anybody else interested in working with a collaborator? Otherwise, we have some synthetic ideas we can give to you guys. Okay. We'll come and we'll give you guys some things to work on. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So does anybody have questions for Greg or I at the get-go about their idea? Working on this template.
Okay, I do.
Okay.
Well,
Greg, can you help her?
Oh.
Also, we just do the quick retrospective.
Oh yeah. Did you want to do that now? Sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
just at the end of that section.
Yep.
before people
Sure.
start.
Sure. Sorry. Go. Do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, so a few things just about room setup. We did get the 4 tables to cover them with paper. This wasn't because we were worried about you being messy eaters, but you can feel free to write on that and brainstorm as you're working through ideas and show ideas visually if you're collaborating with anyone. The next thing is we were trying to create sort of a retrospective wall here for ourselves to gather feedback on this presentation and this format and how useful it is to you. And I placed Post-it pads on each table, and I was hoping I could ask each of you right now to grab 2 of those and write 2 things, 1 idea per note. The first thing is either something you learned in the presentation or something you liked about the presentation, right? Stuff that was good. And the second note, if you could write sort of a question that wasn't answered for you, something you think you should do differently, or something you wish was included in the presentation. Does that make sense? Something either you learned or liked, and something you'd like to do differently, or still have a question about that you wish was addressed.
More product development. Huh?
Exactly. And once you have those notes, if you could bring them over here to this wall, and the other side, you'll see a note that says presentation down there on the glass. The liked stuff goes in the top glass, and the things you'd like to see or didn't get out of the session that you wanted goes in the bottom glass. And it's probably a good idea, just energy-wise, to get out of your seat for a moment and walk, because we've all been sitting here over an hour. So if you do that, we'd really appreciate it.
All right, everyone up, jump, come.
It helps, movement's good.
We're at a Tony Robbins seminar now.